All right. So my name is Matt Tsang, or Matty Tsang, and I coach at the middle school level as well as the club level. And this is going to be mainly on middle school, but I think it can extend into high school. So how many middle school coaches do we have in here? Oh, we got a lot. And then any high school coaches? Okay, great. So in terms of the format, what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to walk you through just kind of my goals for my middle school team and kind of how I go through that and my thought process. And then what I wanted to do is I want to answer as many specific questions as possible. So give you, so the reason why those are up there is just to remind me. And what we'll probably do is I'll speak for maybe 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll pick a couple of these, because there's a lot of people who have coaching experience in this room, and some people who have been doing it longer than me. And so I want to have a little bit of discussion. We'll try to answer some of these questions both with the group, and I will offer some opinions about it as well. So, so just a little bit about kind of how I came to coach in middle school. I'm a middle school teacher at a public school in Berkeley. It's a pretty diverse school. About half of our kids are on food stamps. Berkeley is kind of in this interesting area where you have people who live in the hills and the flats, and they're all in one school, and it's a wonderful place to teach. And I taught there for quite a while before I started Ultimate. And what happened was I had been coaching for about 10 years, and I had been teaching for about 10 years. So I knew Ultimate really well, and I knew middle school kids really well. And in 2008, I started the Ultimate program, and I walked out on the field, and I first of all sent them out on a lap. And they, just a warm-up lap, like no problem, right? And so they go out and they run the lap, and there's like 3 kids who are on the cross-country team, and they're running so fast, beautiful. And then there's people in the back, like one guy is like tackling this other person, and then there's one other kid chasing a squirrel. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, like what is going on here, right? We set up a really simple drill. I talk about throwing. We set up a drill, and they're standing in line, and there's a kid who had like a big old Gatorade bottle in his pocket, and he's trying to run the drill. And I'm like, how can you run a drill with like 32 ounces of Gatorade in your pocket? Like his pants are falling down when he's doing this. So, and what I found was my first year coaching middle school was incredibly humbling. And I think those of you who have been coaches is even today, like I know when I start my season that I get humbled every time I coach youth. Because it brings out a lot of the things that I'm not good at, and the kids are really good at kind of exposing that. So at the same time, I would say that coaching middle schoolers, I coached the middle schoolers to a loss in the semifinals at the state finals, and that loss ranks up there with coaching Fury in 2010, double game point, winning a world championship. So in terms of me as a coach, the value and what I get out of it, they're equal, even though in those circumstances, they're very, very different. So after my first year, I started thinking about it a little bit more. And what I realized was that I wasn't approaching I was actually just trying to get this. I was like, I'm going to go out and teach Ultimate. And what I realized was that in order to be more effective, I actually needed to not focus on this as much, but actually focus on this a lot more. And so I'm going to talk through a little bit about kind of how I approach a season right now. Okay, so the first thing is about team culture. So, one of the things that, a lot of times we don't think, at the middle school level, we think we're just teaching Ultimate, but you actually, we think we're like, oh, if I just had the great drill to teach this skill, then it's going to be great. And what you actually need to do is teach them how to run a drill, right? They don't know how to stand in line and wait. They don't know what they should be doing. They don't even know how to run a lap. So one of the first things is we happened to be at the high school, and the lacrosse team was running a lap. And we're all sitting there getting ready. And I was like, look at that team. Look how they're warming up. I was like, do they look like a team? They're like, yeah. I was like, when we run, we look like we're in PE, right? And I was like, if we want to be a team, we have to look like a team. And when we show up to a game, I want it to look like that. And so it was as basic as that, as teaching them how to be a team, right? And some of that was how to run a lap. So I was like, first of all, we can't go slow, but we can't go as fast as the cross countries who all want to lead the lap. They always want to go fast. So, I made a certain rule of how far apart they should be and how quickly they should be going. And I had those two people lead it. And I had the fastest and slowest runner be the leaders, and they started running the lap. And so teaching them at the very sort of basic level. One of the things that I noticed that I try to focus, and so under team culture here, one thing I talk about is making good mistakes. And so when you're coaching beginners, they make tons of mistakes. And one of the things that, I think when we're thinking about team culture, we're trying to create a positive atmosphere where it is easy to learn and you feel supported. And if you know middle schoolers, they're not naturally the most supportive people, okay? And a lot of it's just sort of the youth culture. Like if you sit around middle schoolers, what do? Their comments are like, oh, look at your shoes, your teeth are funny, right? Like that is a natural part of being a middle schooler, but it is not how to be a good teammate, okay? And so I think what we need to realize is that these behaviors, and the kids that you have that come in and they're really supportive, that's a learned behavior, okay? And so a lot of what we're trying to do is actually teaching behaviors that sometimes we assume because we're around adults a lot that they actually know how to do, but they don't actually know. So one thing I often say is like, we want to make good mistakes. And the sort of classic thing is we're out on the field and someone throws a terrible pass and he says, oh my God, can't believe they did that. Or they're really angry, right? Like oftentimes in games you see them really angry. And my first comment is, hey, you know what? You're totally legitimate. You can have that reaction if you've never made a mistake in your life. And everyone's like, okay, well, that's not me. And then the other thing that I try to do is whatever drill I actually do, I'm conscious of highlighting what is a good mistake in this drill. So here's the point of our drill, okay? And so an example might be, let's say we have a drill where there's a mark, the field's going this way, and let's say they're cutting here and we're just trying to throw it to them, okay? And so we're just working on just throwing this pass. The good mistake is for me to overthrow here, okay? The not so good mistake is for me to overthrow here. So in the drill, I'm going to focus on that, and then when they do this, because a lot of times they're never going to complete this, right? This is my ideal, but I want to create a bigger sort of wedge where they can be successful. And so one of the things I'll do is like, hey, this is a great mistake. Like, great mistake, Miranda. Way to overthrow that. She has a chance to get that. Or if she was Superman, she could fly and get that, okay? But if you throw it behind here, there's no way, okay? So in terms of what I'm verbalizing, I start saying that, and that starts getting people out of the mind of not making a mistake first as an individual, and then also not being as critical, realizing that we're all here to make mistakes. Another thing that I try to always say, and you guys can stop me or ask questions if you have at any point, is I like to say, learn from your teammates. And this is something I say all the time. I say this when I coach adults as well. But what this started out with my problem, we set up a drill, and I have all these people waiting in a line, and the people in the back invariably never pay attention, right? And it's so frustrating. And then they get up to the front of the line, and they do the drill wrong. And you're like, I can't believe it. I explained it. And my first year, for those of you coach, I have this as a teacher too. I often have these out-of-body experiences where I suddenly see myself and I'm like, oh man, I'm one of those teachers, or I'm one of those coaches. And I hear, if you do that one more time, right? Like you start hearing that. And I still do that. I know that's going to happen in a couple of weeks when we start middle school. So it was so frustrating. My first year, I started punishing them by making them run laps. And you know what that did? That just took a lot of time of them running laps. And after my first year, I realized that I couldn't do that anymore. That what I wanted them to do is pay attention during the drill. And me making them run laps was basically, don't pay attention to the drill, go run a lap, come back, don't pay attention to the drill again, right? Like, we do this all the time where we don't address the problem. It's kind of like, oh, I want this Nalgene to drink it. And I was like, hey, you know what? Can you tell Reed to get me this drink? And then it doesn't happen. I'm like frustrated, where actually the problem is getting this drink. So my problem was that people are in a drill not paying attention. And so what I started saying was that we need to learn from our teammates. Okay? And so when you're in the drill, you need to be observing what's happening, and you need to, when somebody is doing something well, you want to emulate that. And when they're making a mistake, you also want to observe that and see if you can solve that mistake in your head. Okay? And so a lot of times in my drills, along with saying the cues for the drill, I'm always saying learn from your teammates. And so that becomes a really easy thing, that if I see Pumbaa in the back, I'm like, Pumbaa, we got to learn from our teammates. Okay? That then extends to, in terms of my coaching skill, is that I will stop drills to highlight what has gone well. And usually what we do is we stop and highlight what has gone poorly. Okay? So, I'll be like, stop, that was really great. Did you see how Michael, when he threw that, he overthrew a little bit and she still got that? Like, we want to be more like Mike. Okay? And then boom, and go again. And by always highlighting, as opposed to me stepping into the drill saying, this is how I would like you to do this, by highlighting other people on the team and what they are doing well, you're starting to build this aspect of learning from your teammates and kind of how to be a better teammate in terms of that aspect. Okay. Any questions about that so far? Anyone have the out-of-body experience? Yeah. All right. The other part of, just as a kind of aside in terms of thinking about coaching, I think about coaching as that you are shaping perception. Reality is reality, but it's actually not reality. It's how you perceive things. And so a big part of when I'm thinking about coaching is how I'm creating a perception of what I want and how our team is operating. So another thing I like to do is I like to acknowledge players after practice. And this is really easy to do, and it's actually good for them and good for you too. So one thing at the end of each practice, I will pick 2 or 3 players in our huddle before we do our cheer, and I will acknowledge them. And one of the really important things to do is to, I often acknowledge not something skill-wise they did, but some other quality, right? So it could be something that's often not looked at on the field, like what we were talking in the last one about clearing. Like, hey, I really love how that person made space. It could be how somebody got everyone to pay attention right in the beginning of practice, right? So what you're doing is creating a perception of what is valuable on your team, and that is going to build into your team culture. It also is really good for you as a coach, because it starts making you realize that the respect that you confer on a player is by the fact that they're on your team, not by their skill level, okay? And even if you are the most open-minded, like lovey-dovey, I like everyone, as coaches and when you're in that role, it's very easy to confer more respect on higher skilled players and more talented players, okay, unconsciously. So it's also a really nice thing for you in terms of when you're approaching it to start changing your thinking in that way. We have a couple more in the sort of the team culture. The other thing that I like to do is what I just call talk it up. So again, we often, when we go out and we run a drill and people are making mistakes, oftentimes there's a lot of comments, right? And so you might want to stop the comments, but actually what would be more productive is actually teaching them what to say. And have you guys ever seen the baseball teams, right? Baseball players, they stand there like, hey, what's up? They have all these things that they say. And so watching the baseball team, I realized that, they have all these kind of phrases that you talk to the pitcher, you talk to the batter, and it's all real positive, right? And it's actually really fun. And so what we start doing is for all the drills or for some, I always talk about talking it up, and we actually have the phrases that I would like them to be saying during the drill, right? And so there is stuff that I just model, like, hey, good bid, nice try, way to go too. there's those things, but also I kind of depend on them to come up with their own phrases. So for what, and oftentimes, because it's kids, it's really ridiculous, right? So swag was a really big thing. But every time someone went hard to do this, they were like, swag. And I'm like, okay, that's ridiculous. But they love that, right? And by them having that kind of like vocabulary, they learn how to talk it up. And it also builds into team culture of their team identity. And so suddenly, like, there's a whole thing that went along with swag, and they made a whole new acronym with the swag. And so, it's not my favorite word, but it gets to that role of giving them something to say and being productive in terms of how they're talking to each other.
What was the acronym?
Oh man, I just ignore that stuff. Just as an aside, and this actually, I think I heard, I think Tina Booth, who's over in Amherst, mentioned this. Just as an aside, I think we'll talk about it maybe in terms of structure. A lot of you who coach Ultimate, if you're doing it after school, you've had kids who've been sitting inside like this for 8 hours. And so when they come out, like, there's no way they're going to listen to you. So when you're structuring your practices, you have to realize that that first 15, 20 minutes should be them where they can like kind of be ridiculous. And so I think Tina and I actually do this a lot. We do the active, dynamic warm up, but I let them active stretch, and I leave at that point because they're going to talk about all the funny acronyms out of swag, and I'm like, this is ridiculous, right? But it's a time for them to kind of let off steam. They can talk about whatever happened during, and I don't have to hear it. And then when I'm back and we've actually started that part, they know that they should be listening to me the whole time or listening to whoever else. So that's just as an aside. So during when they came out with what swag should mean, I was off setting up cones. And then the last thing under this that we start talking about is kind of uncontrollables. And so this goes into starting to build a team culture that is mentally resilient. The wonderful thing about middle schoolers is that they don't edit their thoughts, and it comes straight out of their mouths. And that makes it wonderful and exciting. And so uncontrollables would be something like, and this happens all the time, the team shows up to play the game, and we're warming up, and I'm standing here, and suddenly I see all their faces look that way. And then they start just kind of talking like, oh, they're so tall. Those are all 8th graders, right? And I'm sure that you guys of Ultimate players have done exactly the same thing, right? But you learn how to just kind of edit that. So they're suddenly like, oh my God, they're so tall. Or the other thing is like, oh, they look so short, we're going to crush them, right? Both of those things happen. And so one of the things that we start talking about is things that we control and what we can't control. And so, for instance, that happened. I was like, okay, yeah, they're really tall. I was like, is anyone here going to grow in the next hour and a half? And they're like, no. I was like, so can we do anything? Are they going to shrink in the next hour and a half? No. I was like, okay, so let's get back and let's actually talk about something we can control. And then I also tell them about the story of a Japanese team that beat my really good team, and they're really short. And so they have that. And we actually won that game against a bunch of really tall people. So then they were like, we're like the Japanese. And of course, the other team was like, what? So a lot of times what I try to do is we start talking about this. And, it's kind of hard to, with uncontrolled, with adults, we can do this at a kind of higher level. But with them, one of the things I do is I'll actually have them throw out all the things that they're thinking. And then just so they verbalize it. And then I just kind of focus on the things I was like, okay, that we can't do anything about that. We can't do it. It's cold. Can't do anything about that. And then we focus on the things that we can do. And usually it's just going back to what we worked on. Okay. Just in the interest of time, I'll kind of stop there for the team culture. But those are some of the things that I like to kind of do with the team culture. And honestly, I spend probably 40 or 50% of my time on these things. Maybe even more. Maybe it's like 60% of my coaching is actually related to, obviously, like, I'm not just sitting down talking about things, but in a drill, what I'm actually looking for is making good mistakes, learning from my teammates, acknowledging players, talking it up, not talking about uncontrollables. And the drill, in some ways, is secondary. And I find when I started doing this that this part got a lot easier. Okay. Any questions or experiences with kind of team culture or like breaking down to that part?
I remember like 2 years ago at Westerns,
And I've done a lot of the teaching ultimate first, right? And then I was thinking about that mentally resilient part of like young players, and so this is high school, but it's still, that's something that's hard for them. And so I did a lot of research, and I just, read like every single John Wooden book. And I had them, I put out the Pyramid of Success, and I cut out certain pieces, and I had kids read them. Especially the kids that had a hard time with like certain things, I had them read things that kind of like accounted to them. And it was really cool. It was just hearing them talk to each other and letting them discuss it as a group was really fascinating to like think about the team culture that way. And since then, like that's been a bigger focus, and it's definitely helped a lot too.
Anyone else? No? Okay. So my second goal, and again, these are my goals for my team, and so I'm just using this as a framework. And my second goal was to expose a diverse group of kids to a new sport. So at my middle school, even at the middle school level, kids self-segregate mainly according to class and ethnicity really quickly. So all the black and Latina girls play softball. Certain people play basketball. Another mix of people play soccer. And so when I came to decide to coach middle school, I was like, well, no one knows about the sport. No one has any kind of preconceived notions, except that it's not a real sport, right? It's a toy, right, that we play with. So I decided that I could create whatever I wanted to. So in terms of starting, and this is kind of more related to maybe starting a program at the school, is that I was really conscious with how I formed my team. And basically what I wanted some athletes, and I want to expose people who played other sports to this other sport that's a real sport. So I went out and recruited basketball players and some of the football players that I knew at the school. And again, I had the advantage of actually being there a lot. I knew I wanted some girls, so I went and recruited girls. I knew I wanted some people who had never played any sports before, right? Middle school is a great place to do that. And so my goal was basically to have the demographics of our school basically reflected in our team. And one of the things that I think in terms of kind of the bigger picture of how this might apply is, my first year I just kind of started it and realized I didn't have enough girls. And so the second year, I just made a quota for myself. I was like, I need a third of the team to be girls. Okay, it wasn't like no girls are showing up, right? Like we hear a lot of like, I don't know, we have practice, no one shows up. And I was just like, I'm going to have 20 players on the team. I need 6 to 7 girls. So I went out, and what I did was, again, the advantage of being at the school is I knew these 3 people were friends. And again, like, just like adults, like recruiting a revolver for Michael's team, nobody wants to be the leader. You want a big group of people. So I went up to them, and I talked to 3 of these girls, and I knew that if they came, there would be 2 more. And so I went to that group, and I talked to them, and I spent a couple things like throwing with them. They were kind of shy, and I was like, hey, why don't you come out to tryouts? And so a lot of just sort of starting programs and recruiting for the programs is a lot of kind of the social aspect and understanding those dynamics. And that's how, each year I just make a kind of goal for myself, and try to do that. And my AD is actually okay with that. I'll just kind of leave that at that. And then my last goal is to teach Ultimate. Okay, so that's the third thing, and why probably most people are here is actually how do you teach Ultimate. So the thing is, so I have an 8-week season. So it's pretty short. And I think the biggest thing that people do is they try to teach too much. So this is what I teach. And I'm going to put more than I actually teach because I feel bad when I write this list. I teach throwing. I teach catching. We're almost done. I'll teach stack. I'm going to just put mirror defense. And then force. Oh, actually, we'll put one more thing. So it looks like I'm awesome. Switch fields. Okay, so Basically, if I can get, so throwing and catching obviously as a skill, and if I can get to here with most of my kids, I'm pretty happy. These two other things are really important, and when I'm thinking about it, if someone starts at 6th grade, they're building on this basically for those 3 years, okay? But really what I'm doing in this 8-week is throwing, catching, and stack, and in switching fields. Like those are the main sort of concepts that I would like to do. Do people do you have an opinion about that? Do people teach a lot more, or is that too much, perhaps? No? Okay.
How do they respond to force? I mean, and learning that. How hard a concept is that for middle school?
It's pretty hard for them to perhaps figure it out on their own. But what I want to do is when I yell the force and then I yell which side their butt should be facing, that they can do that. Because force is actually really complicated, right? It depends where it is on the field, and suddenly like your butt should be facing one way, and then when the disc moves, it should be somewhere else. So adults don't even get that. They do that wrong all the time, really. So I want them to be able to call a force and know for the most part where they should be facing. So we're relatively successful with that, yeah.
Is that just for all players or new players? I mean, do you mix it up with more experienced players?
That's all players. And again, you might think that it's too simple, but switching fields is something I work with Fury, right? Think about the teams. How many times do you guys get trapped on the sideline and just throw up the sideline all the time, right? So even though it's a really simple concept, it's something that can always be worked on. And so when we're thinking about this, it can kind of serve all levels. And the reason why those other things are there is I want to make sure that people who have been with me for a couple of years are also learning and getting on there. So what I would encourage you is once you figure out what you want to do, sketch it out. And the other thing is you want to try to stick to it, okay? So for instance, we have a coach that loves to zone. Am I going to teach zone offense? No, it's not on my list, okay? But what do? I go to this game and I know they're going to zone us. Right? And I still want my team to be successful. That's not you, Michael, someone else. You probably did it too, but it's all right. So what I did was I basically used my same concept of switching the fields, and I was like, okay, they're coming with a new defense. We're not going to learn, there's ways to do this, but what we're going to do is we're just really going to work on our dump swing, and we're going to have 4 people involved in our dump swing. So when we get it, and that zone comes down, I just want you to dump swing, and then let's try to turn the corner. That's it. Okay, so again, like I didn't go into suddenly, oh my God, they need to learn this, and now I'm going to spend 2 weeks doing this. I can't spend, if I do that, I'm going to lose all of this other stuff, right? Another example is probably strategically, you should have a pull play, right? Because your kids are going to turn it over. It might be nice for them to turn it over not near the end zone. So when the pull comes down, maybe you should have a play. My play is basically incorporates the things that we've been talking over here with the switching of the fields. Okay, it's not a different play. I call it a pull play, but it's basically what should be happening in our normal offense. Okay, so notice that I'm sticking to my goals and what I've set out for the team, and I'm adjusting it enough to kind of come up with these other situations. I'm not going to kind of get out of my lane and start doing these other things, which I think there's often a tendency to do as a coach is like, oh, suddenly I need to talk for about 25 minutes about this new thing. And they're like, they're not getting it, right? If I can get them to know throwing, catching, stack, and switching fields, I'm really happy by the end of the year. All right. And then the last thing I'll say because I want to have time to get to some of these questions, really important. I have a very structured practice. There's no ultimate time. They show up on time, very clear expectations. But at the same time, in it, realize they're kids, and we're trying to get them hooked on the sport. And I want kids to continue playing and be happy about it. Okay, so be age appropriate. Like running a whole bunch of drills over and over doesn't really make sense. Okay, so when they come, they can warm up doing a whole bunch of different things, right? They can play Monarch, they can play tag. A lot of times the drills that we're doing is just joy of throwing the disc and not actually, it's practicing throwing and catching, but it's not ultimate. Put them in a big box, have them try to complete 4 throws, all with 4-hand grip. Okay, and that's the game, and they can go over there. I also don't limit what throws they can throw, except for air bouncing. But part of the joy of throwing is all the cool things you can do with this. And if they want to throw this, which is not that, oh no, that one could be useful. This one, I don't know what that one is not useful. In a part when we're kind of having free throwing, I let them do that, okay? The only thing that I haven't been able to open my soul up to is air bouncing, because I feel like it really messes up their throws. But it's such a cool throw, right? And so and I can't actually throw one that well, so I can't really teach it. But you know, like in terms of like limiting that, realize like getting them hooked, they have to have the joy of throwing a toy around, running around and getting it, rolls on the ground, they're diving it. So I build that into my structured, you know, practice, but I build those points in where we're not doing such hard skills, but they're hopefully getting hooked on all those things. And then the last thing, I sub equally from the beginning to the end. I stick to that. To probably a fault, I don't talk about positions. No handlers, no cutters, and I don't play with a dump. And the reason why I do that is because I want them to learn as much as possible. And the weird dynamic is either everyone wants to be a handler because that's somehow a better position, or nobody wants to be a handler because they're scared. I don't want to have that. I noticed when I was coaching in the club level, I would get a lot of players that had been pigeonholed really early, cutters especially, where they would always catch the disc and look back to dump it. And I worked so hard with those upper level players where you can't dump, you have to look upfield, that I decided with my youth that we don't even talk about. And I don't play with the dump because I don't want them to get used to standing behind the disc. And your best thrower is going to stand behind the disc because they want to get the disc every single time I throw it upfield. Again, this is a personal philosophy, but that will get me closer to a lot of those goals over there. Okay. All right. Any questions about that before we hit some of these? Reed.
So what do you teach for stack then, if your offense is not quote-unquote normal?
So if we have a stack, it's basically if you're in the front of the stack, these are the types of cuts you're doing. So the people in the front of the stack are trying to get it. You know, basically the way I explain it is if this is our field and we have a stack, we try to go up one side until we're stopped, and then we go up the other side until we stopped, and then we go down one side until we're stopped. If you're in the front of the stack, you're just trying to get it into this lane so we can attack this lane. If you're in the back, you're trying to get yardage gaining cuts in that lane. And that's kind of how I leave it. You'll notice that some kids will they'll pick it up and they'll start gravitating toward what positions they will. And then I'll just kind of like, not as a whole group, but say, hey, why don't you try doing these cuts? And so I don't talk about handlers, and then we don't have a dump. So that's basically what I've done. The first year I did all of those things, and it was too much for me. So I just kind of simplified it.
How many people on the field you play with? 7-7?
A lot of times we will play, we don't have a full field, so we'll play 4-on-4, 5-on-5, 6-on-6. I generally have 20 to 24 on a team.
So 5-on-5, it probably makes a lot more sense to just, say that. You run into difficulties if you were to play 7-on-7?
Not so much. I feel like your difficulties in general are so many other things that's not the huge sticking point.
Okay.
The sticking point is so many other things, right? It's kind of ridiculous how many things that go wrong. Any other questions about that? Yes.
Well, I was just on Hulu's comment. One of the things that I feel like, especially newer players, since they don't know what to do, it's a lot of standing around and then they're running around players. So having less players just gives them more space. So when they see that, oh my God, there's 20 yards to an end zone, and I can actually run without someone just standing in the way, and I'm picking players all the time, which they still know about. But
right.
Yeah, it makes them feel more comfortable because there's less players.
Right.
And you have to do more. You can't rely on 6 other people. You have to rely on 3.
Yeah, I think small-sided games are probably the most important, and we rarely play 7-on-7 because I want everyone running around and our field isn't that big, so we have a bunch of mini fields. So when we go and play, then we have more players. So, all right. What I would like you guys to do is really quickly look at these, and we're going to vote. I want to take, let's see, how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. We're going to pick 3 of these. So, and then what I'm going to do is I'll break you up into probably 3 or 4 groups. So there'll be 4 or 5 of you in each group. You'll talk for about 5 minutes, and then we'll try to address it as a group. So take a moment to kind of look. I'll let you vote for 2. Does that make sense? How does this work? Voting for 1 makes the most sense? And okay, yeah, we can vote, and then we'll take in order. All right, is everyone ready to vote? Okay, how to get 1 or 2 kids who choose disrespectful not to affect the others? Okay, will someone count for me real quick so we can do?
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's like 9.
Okay. How to sustain deep pool of consistent coaching given the youth and life stage of many possible coaches? Let me do. Okay. How do you deal with disparity in skill and size? 3, 4, 5. Girls coaching boys. This one. Engaging parents. Getting kids interested. Oh, 2. Okay. Getting kids interested in ultimate over other activities. Recruiting. Okay. This is how to convince kids to share the disc in order to help develop their own team players. What's the number?
4, 5.
Ooh, all right. Coaching to win versus coaching to develop skills. I like that one. Always win. Notice winning wasn't on my thing. Okay, nobody? Win. Okay. Should middle school be co-ed or single gender? I would love to talk about that. I'm not trying to influence it. How should I divide time between teaching skills and strategy? Okay. All right. Do we have some clear winners? 9, and not winners. Okay. We will try to, during lunch, we can talk. I would love to talk about all of these. So we have 1, 2, and then let's pick one, and this one. Okay. Let's do groups of, you guys will be a group. You guys will be a group, and maybe Murr and Reed, you guys could move over there. Does that make sense? Okay. What do you guys want to talk about?
Disparity in skill and size.
Okay. You guys are doing disparity in skill size. What about you guys? What do you think you want to do?
We do disrespecting.
Okay. 2 kids disrespecting. And then our last one was how to make kids share the disc in order to help develop their own team and players. So that's the last group over there. We'll give you about 5 minutes, and then we'll share out. All right. Let's try to bring our attention back up here, and we'll share out with the group. All right, let's go ahead and let's have this group over here. Maybe 1 or 2 people tell us which was your issue, and then kind of summarize what were the things that you kind of came up in terms of solutions. So let's start with this group over here.
Sure.
All right, Jeff.
We were talking about great disparity in skill and size, and so one of the problems we were seeing is just when you have in a middle school aspect, we'll just look at that. I mean, 6th graders are really just new 5th graders, and 8th graders are just about to be high schoolers, so their sizes are huge, and there is absolutely a problem, or there could be a possible problem of injury because someone's bigger than smaller. The way I do it at some of the Bay Area camps is I almost break it more into skill than into size, and then I have a lower skilled and a higher skilled, and then you get placed based off that. And then with my new middle school team, this older, taller kid who's brand new was like, "Why don't I get to play with the old kids?" I was like, "Hold on, let's play this one round. And if you feel like you're good to play with the older kids, let me know." And he dropped the disc 5 times, couldn't throw it at all, and he's like, "Nope, I'm good. This is the field I need to be on right now." All right, sounds great. So I just that, and then we were also talking about just making bigger or better skilled players. They may not get better. They may not be better players, but they can be better leaders. Mm-hmm. They can teach the 8-year-old. And us as older people, it is that Charlie Brown syndrome where it's like why, and they don't. At some point, they just nope, it's over.
So engaging some of those people as your teachers.
Yeah, and a 12-year-old might be able to keep their attention longer because they are who they are.
Right. Let me ask a question maybe to the larger group. what do you do for the person on your team who's really, really, really good at Ultimate, and they're kind of with a bunch of beginners all the time, right? And they get a little bit better, and no one ever reaches them. Does anyone have a solution for that? Like, you want to kind of serve their needs too, but there's only 2 of those really good players. What do you do, Reed?
I try to kind of make those. I kind of go to those players and try to make them kind of little assistant coaches. Help them realize that they need to help these players develop to help the team develop, and being able to develop those skills are going to help them develop, their personal skills and get them better.
So helping them develop kind of other skills other than the quote unquote on-field skills, but they're as leaders, as teachers, as bigger thinkers on the team. Okay, great. Anything else you guys want to add to that?
We discussed how small-sided games definitely help you deal with the safety aspects of having differently sized people, especially when you get clusters of people together. The 6-foot-tall dude is going to injure the 4'11" girl much more likely, and so 3-on-3 that avoid that a little bit.
Yeah, excellent. One thing I did on Fury, we were talking about basically getting positioning, and so I lined them up from tall to really tall, so no one felt like they're short, and then I joined the tall, it made the lines match. And what you'll find is on the teams that have really tall people, they actually don't get position, they just out jump. And so we have a hucking drill where they can't jump, it's all position, they only can stretch. And those tall people hate that drill. So I kind of went the other way and just kind of like put the smallest and biggest people together. All right, great. Let's see. This group right over here, what was your issue? And then maybe summarize a couple things that you talked about.
We were how to get the 1 or 2 kids. Sorry, oh my gosh.
Who choose disrespectful behavior not to infect others.
Okay, so that, with the disrespectful kids and how to not let them kind of infect the rest of the team. We talked about like pulling them aside as individuals and talking to them one-on-one versus saying like, you're being awful right now in front of everybody. That's not, you're kind of demonstrating that same behavior. But pulling them aside and kind of talking to them and reminding them that this is like a team and a culture and that they need to kind of stick with that. But then there's extreme cases where some kids, maybe they don't want to be there or, for whatever reason. And I just was kind of thinking about this sorry, I don't know who was mentioning this, about like having a little assistant coach. If with those kids who are just pretty awful, like maybe you could explain to them like, hey, if you're, doing a good job at maybe using those like, what did you say, like talking it up and being positive, like at the end I'll let you like choose this drill or the thing that you want to do and maybe make it again, turn it more into a positive. So at the beginning they realize like them being respectful throughout practice, they kind of get to see some benefit and get to kind of have some say in what they want to do. Because I think in the end, like those disrespectful kids are sometimes it's because they're telling everybody else like they're doing everything wrong. So maybe give them that chance to use their voice more in a positive way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and giving them a focus was a good
yeah.
thing as well. So that usually they have a lot of energy. So when they get that focus and give them maybe a difficult task, and then at the end also be positive if they manage that well.
I think one thing to realize is those behaviors have a reason behind them. They're not just those people, right? And to figure out what is causing that and then how you can redirect that. Like some of my most just like ill, terrible students, they're really charismatic and they've learned how to use that power in a certain way. And if you can switch it, they can be the most wonderful leaders on your team. And so, I think that's a good perspective to have. All right, just in the interest of time, we'll go over to here, present your issue, and then maybe summarize a couple of thoughts.
Well, the issue was how to convince kids to share the disc in order to help develop their own team and players, and it relates to the 1 or 2 great players on the team. I guess I'll just start with, I thought there was a couple of really good ideas that Miranda mentioned, which was spontaneous. Hey, let's try a scrimmage with more than 1 disc and just see what happens, because then one player can't have 2 discs. just push the envelope in terms of thinking. I thought that was really nice. But the other thing that came to mind, I think this was also Miranda's suggestion, but that is just do some drills with no disc at all. and then it enables you to really break down the skill into something that doesn't require a completed throw or something like that. So those were a couple. I think there was a lot of other ideas if you guys want to chime in.
Anyone want to add to that on how getting kids to share the disc? Yeah.
Yeah, I think what Matty was saying about acknowledgments and, oftentimes those kids that aren't sharing the disc don't need to be praised, but we're still tending to praise them because they're the ones throwing the goals or catching the goals, and we just need to make sure that we're acknowledging a diverse array of talents.
I think one way to think about some of those is you can re-incentivize things, right? So it's a natural feedback, like when you catch a disc, right? Like, oh, I got the disc. That's awesome. That's what we're supposed to be doing. So we've created the situation where it's an incentive to actually go get the disc. And so you can create incentives like the team, you get points when all four, let's play a small-sided game, all four people touch the disc, you get a point, and you get a point for scoring, right? You can incentivize a game that if during this game, when a pass is going to that side, we have one of the teams actually running to this side, they get a point, right? So realize a lot of the behaviors that we are trying to change, we've actually set up the structure where we're incentivizing that behavior. And so they're just doing what they're supposed to be doing. And that if you kind of flip it a little bit and change your structure or the incentive of the game, then you'll start getting some of those other behaviors. And then once you can get both of those behaviors, then you actually have a complete, sort of skill set or mental set that you want to have. Let me take one more comment from over there, and then we're going to close in the interest of time. You obviously can stay, and I'd be happy to talk with you about other things. But are there any other comments? Okay. Oh, Reed.
I mean, going with what our problem with what we were talking about sharing the disc is building up roles that are not just throwing. Make it so it's not just the it's fine to have you probably end up with teams that have 2 or 3 significantly better throwers, but being able to really positively build up the other people that go into making a play successful, whether that is the person who made that awesome cut to get 12 yards. Or the person who made a cut didn't get the disc and then got out of the way quickly so someone else could cut. Really building up those roles and understanding that that person was just as important as the person who threw it. I've had a lot of successful teams where we had a lot of people touch the disc and then it's just boom, dishy back to that 1 or 2 good throwers. And I've never had a team that had a problem with that because they all feel like they're contributing because they are contributing in different ways, even if it's just one person who's getting all the yardage with throws.
And you can build that into your team culture where you have maybe that's the swag play or that's the swag player, and you can build that in. So again, like that's kind of re-incentivize or creating the value in things that are valuable that we often don't get the direct feedback for. Okay, why don't you guys go to lunch, and I'll stay around if people want to talk about some other stuff. Thank you.